I remember that there was a moment where I was annoyed with my clients and I said, I'm in a helping profession. If I'm annoyed with like 99% of my clients that don't deserve it, I maybe need to rethink if this is the right place for me right now. And so that was a large part of it for me, was realizing this one-on-one work is really draining. I was helping people go through layoffs. It was very emotional. I took on probably too much. I didn't have enough of a delineation between their story and my story. And I have learned how to move away from that now. But there was a point where I was like, I'm just over this. I'm over my clients. And you don't really want to be in that spot if you're helping people.
Exit Plan is a podcast for business owners and those who want to be business owners. I'm always in search of the lesser known stories of entrepreneurship. In the Exit Plan podcast, you'll hear stories from startup to sale and hear from the professionals who helped business owners achieve their exit. Hosted by me, author and private equity manager Dana Robinson, along with my co-hosts and guests, you'll hear real stories, tips, and tools that will help you plan for the exit you want, whether you are still working at a day job or running a business. Let's get started with this episode of the Exit Plan Podcast. Hey everybody, it's Dana Robinson on the Exit Plan Podcast, coming to you from my humble studio and bringing to you Jena, Dunay. Excited to have Jena on the podcast, introduced to me by my book coach, Jeff Goins. Thank you, Jeff, for the introduction, and thanks for joining me today, Jena.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here, and it's great to hear a little bit more about your book and what you've been working on too.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'll do a quick commercial, and my editor will probably insert another commercial. It's launch week for my book, The King's Fly Swatter. It is a book about how entrepreneurship actually flows from your job. So you basically learn the things that you need to know to become self-employed at your job. And that means your job is this really fertile ground for grabbing tools, building contacts, relationship skills, all while you're at a job that you might not even like. And I tell my stories, and as well as the stories of entrepreneurs that I know about how most entrepreneurs aren't these big fancy stories that you see on television. They're really humble beginnings. Dana Robinson here. Quick plug for my book, The King's Fly Swatter. You can see it here behind me if you're watching this. I've got it in my hand. It's a beautiful hardcover book, printed to make it giftable, something that you can share with a family member, buy as a gift. So this latest book, it's a fable about a person who has a really crappy job. Let's just start there. This is a book that most people can relate to because we've all had crappy jobs. This is the story of Ubar, a servant in the court of a Babylonian king, who masters his boring, monotonous job and then learns to listen to the king, hearing him rule the kingdom while quietly swatting flies behind the king. Eventually, Ubar becomes the wisest and most successful man in the kingdom. The story is fun and it's easy to read, but it's not mythology. It's my story. And as I shared the idea with colleagues and friends, I learned that it was their story. And guess what? It's your story. If you're at a job of any kind, one that you love, one that you hate, one that's just enough to get by, this little book gives fresh perspective on how to leverage that job to get you something greater than a paycheck. The lessons in this parable are entrepreneurial lessons, but not what you might think from the current entrepreneurial zeitgeist. If you or someone you know are looking for a real pathway to entrepreneurship, here's the secret. Your job is the way out of your job. It's counterintuitive, but once you see how it works, you can't unsee it. Learn the way of the fly swatter from the parable of Ubar and from the stories I share from my 30-year business journey. You can get a free copy of The King's Fly Swatter by going to danarobinson.com. So the goal with the Exit Plan podcast is to get people on who help people through their business cycle, leveling their business up, exiting into entrepreneurship and exiting out of entrepreneurship. So I'm excited to have you talk about your own journey, and then let's talk about the things that you've learned that you do help others through with their businesses.
Amazing. Well, it's kind of funny you were talking about you learn a lot of skills when you're in your day job, because that definitely was me. And one of the ways that I got into entrepreneurship was I realized I didn't like my job and I wanted to help other people figure out jobs that they really like to do. So I actually started my career out working on Wall Street. I was an investment banker. I have some PTSD from that season of my life.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. We've recovered. So I did that for a little bit of time, and then I actually transitioned to the New York Stock Exchange, which was actually a really, really great place to work for me early in my career. It wasn't as insane as maybe you see on television. I was on the IPO team, and so I got to see these awesome companies go public. So that kind of scratched that entrepreneurial itch at a really kind of formidable years in my career. And while I was there, they just exposed me to a lot of different areas, different departments. So, kind of to your point, I got to see and use it as that fertile learning ground for what was I good at? What did I like doing? What did I not like doing? And actually, while I was there, they like threw me in front of a camera one day and they said, "You're going to now report live from the trading floor. Good luck." And so
Wow.
it was really fun. It was awesome. Whenever a company would go public, I would actually do a webcast back to their employees that couldn't come to the trading floor that day. And so it wasn't on like, it wasn't on any crazy platform, but it was really fun for me to practice, whet my chops in that area. And it was definitely not a part of the job description that I originally signed on for. So when I was there, I realized I was really bad at finance, but really good at the content creation, at the developing those things, the relationship building. And so I made a pivot and ended up at a startup, which was called themuse.com. It's a career advice site, great career advice site. And while I was there, I realized I wanted to start my own thing officially because I watched people do it and it was time. And so then I started Recruit the Employer at that time. So yeah, crazy beginning part of my career, but
Yeah, but it's the story that rings true. And I started this podcast 8 years ago with a partner, Nate, and our thesis was we would find entrepreneurs who had a cool life to tell
Mm,
their story. So it's called the opt out life, kind of like alternative thinking about business. And we really found that over the course of 100 entrepreneur stories that it's really consistent that almost no one has a crazy idea, a stroke of
yeah.
genius, and then makes millions of dollars. It does happen. We told a couple of those stories. We told the story early on of Dr. Squatch, and that turned out to be one of those giant.
Wow.
Last year they had a Super Bowl commercial.
Yeah.
So it does happen, but it's just not common. You can't plan on it. You can't teach
Yeah.
around it. You can't bet on it. If you say 90% of entrepreneurs learn their skills at their job, so turn back around to the job that's right under your nose
Mhm.
and start being a different kind of employee, one who actually works for themselves right now, even if it's only in
Mhm.
your own head,
Yeah.
that shift is really important. And for you, for example, you learned what you didn't like
Mhm.
and you learned something you didn't even know about yourself. If you hadn't had
Yeah.
the ambition and the sort of like willingness to go,
Mhm.
okay, I'll do anything, give me put a
Yes.
mic in my hand. That could
Yeah.
have been horrifying and embarrassing and all of that. It turned out to be a leaning into a new skill.
Yeah.
So I love that story. I think it's totally resonates with what I found in my interviews, but also in my experience and what I try and flesh out in the book to kind of be that aha for people where they go, oh wait, I stopped sitting at work doing the minimum and dreaming about when you can work for yourself, or even how do you get promoted these days? So, I mean, you probably can
Mhm.
speak to this. How do you get promoted? I've been a general manager and had people who want to get promoted, and I am not equipped to give them the skills to get promoted. I need to find
Mhm.
someone with those skills. So I need people to take the initiative and gain the
Yeah.
skills to become promotable. And that's the same mentality that you say, where in this ecosystem can I squeeze a skill, a
Totally.
relationship, a mentorship, a learning opportunity, any of that?
Yeah, I just took as many opportunities as people would give me, and I just raised my hand a lot. And I think when you're at any point of your career, quite frankly, but especially in your first 10 years of your career, that's your job. Your job is to learn as much as possible, learn about yourself as much as possible, and learn how to be valuable to others as much as possible. So whether you decide to stay in corporate or you decide to pivot out, your job is to figure out how do I be valuable to somebody else, and ultimately that's going to going to allow you to be successful over the long term.
It's all the great stuff you get to take with you. It's up here.
Exactly.
You can leave. I call one chapter the ethical thief. You're never taking the customer list. You're never trying to do
Mm-mm.
wrong by your employer, but you get to leave with all of what you've built into
Yes.
your skill set and your true friendships and relationships that become lifelong lifelines for
Mhm.
building your future career or your future entrepreneurial path.
Yeah. I still talk to people that I worked with at the New York Stock Exchange all the time. They were great people in my corner, great mentors, and that was, over a decade ago now, which is crazy to say. But and I think too whenever you're learning a new skill, don't be afraid to be bad at it at first. I think a lot of people are so scared to try something new because they're afraid they're going to fail. And you kind of said, oh, it wasn't embarrassing. I actually did embarrass myself when I was down on the trading floor. I fainted one time in the middle of a presentation. So you can still faint and recover, and you're going to be fine. I promise.
I love it. Something you turned out to do well was the impetus for
Yeah.
I panic attack, maybe. I mean, this
Yeah.
is, putting a lot of pressure on yourself to do
Yeah.
this thing that you're stepping up and as you say, raising your hand
Yes.
for anything someone says, let's try this.
Yeah.
Well, tell me about the business that you decided to start, and what are some of the lessons you've learned along the way with the business?
Yeah. So when I got into career coaching, which was predominantly what I did for about 5 years, I realized that people kept asking me a lot of questions about how I made so many career pivots, right? So, how did you go from one finance company to a different finance company to then work for a startup? Like, how did you do this? And so, over time, I started coaching people one on one, and then I developed a system, which I now call Recruit the Employer. And so I did that for about 5 years and enjoyed it. I built a following on LinkedIn. I've had a podcast. So a lot of these things that we're talking about, ultimately helping people in a mid to senior level range get their confidence back and find their dream job. Um, I realized at some point, though, that I had created a company and business for myself that I actually didn't like, and I
Mm,
couldn't figure out a way to get out of it. And so I'm actually an interesting case study in being what I call an entrepreneur looper, where I got into entrepreneurship and an opportunity to get back into corporate came along and I took it. And then now I'm back, actually spit back out into entrepreneurship, into phase two of that old business. So it's an interesting kind of trajectory that I've been on since launching into entrepreneurship and then now launching back into it. So yeah, very odd.
I think it's not as uncommon as you think. I went back to work for a company, and I'm a horrible employee as W-2 employees go. I'm incredibly fiercely independent,
Yes,
and say things I shouldn't say, and
I
don't
relate.
play games or manipulate. But I went back to learn some skills, really. Like, it was an
Mhm.
opportunity to do on the job learning. I wanted to know, what's a private equity fund doing in a roll up scenario. I want to
Mm,
operate, but I want to operate the business under the sort of learning environment of professionals. And so call it looping. I burned the boats, sold my law practice, extracted from a couple of entrepreneurial ventures, and said, I'm going to work for somebody. Um, and for you, I guess, let's talk about you started a business. Did it get out of hand and become working a job that I've heard the story. There's a phrase for, that when you work for yourself, you work twice as much as you did when
yeah,
you work for someone else, and you often get half the pay. I'd love
yeah,
to know, like, let's talk about that first venture that you spun back out of.
yeah. So it was a lot of work, to your point, double the amount of time. I did enjoy most of it, but I remember that there was a moment, it was in 2020, where I was annoyed with my clients. And I said, I'm in a helping profession. If I'm annoyed with like 99% of my clients that don't deserve it, maybe need to rethink if this is the right place for me right now. And
Yeah.
so that was a large part of it for me, was realizing this one-on-one work is really draining. I was helping people go through layoffs. It was very emotional. I took on probably too much. I didn't have enough of a delineation between their story and my story. And I have learned how to move away from that now. But at the time, I think there was a point where I was like, I'm just over this. I'm over my clients. And you don't really want to be in that spot if you're helping people. So
Yeah.
that was one of the reasons.
I love that. Yeah. I remember when I knew I was trying to phase myself out of the law practice for years, but the point at which I looked at work that was normally easy and interesting, and I just said to my law partner, Kayla, I can't, I don't want to look at it. I'm avoiding it.
Yeah.
And that's when I knew. I was like, okay, I'd moved through the cycles and was,
Yeah.
no longer interested. And
Yeah.
that's a recipe for not giving good advice and not being a good lawyer, not being a good consultant. Um,
Hmm.
so, so you pivot, you go back to work.
Yeah.
What was the impetus? And let's talk about, like, what the why and what resulted from that move.
Yeah, so I always used to tell my one-on-one clients that never run away from something, always run towards something else. So I was kind of open-handed about what it was going to look like. I actually never thought I'd go back into corporate, even when I was hating my business. That felt like a job at that point. And I had a mentor of mine, and he said, how's it going? How's business? And I said, ugh, I'm so sick of myself. I'm just sick of myself. I'm sick of like seeing my face on LinkedIn. I was really active on LinkedIn at the time. I'm back to being active on LinkedIn, but I'm not annoyed with myself yet. And so I said that to him, and he said, there's this CEO that I know of this multifamily office that's looking for kind of a unicorn person that I think your background could be really interesting. And so push came to shove, they ended up hiring me to be their chief learning officer, which at a family office is kind of a newer concept. And so I was in charge of helping to, formalize and programize, if that's the right word, create a program, if you will, for our high net worth families that were looking to understand how do we, basically the questions they're asking is, how do we not screw up our kids now that we have this money? I mean, we didn't grow up with money, but how do we not screw up our kids now that they have money? And so I worked on kind of some one-on-one basis with some of our clients there. It was really interesting work. And I really did enjoy the leadership team there was just so amazing. And it was a great place for me to your point, take notes about what does it mean to lead well a growing company when you have challenges in growth. And so it was just a great company to be a part of. I was so grateful for the experience.
That's it. That's great. And multifamily offices, they have a variety of flavors. Was this one that had investments in companies where you got visibility into their acquisitions and the companies they were invested in?
I did a little bit. I was much more on what I call the feely side of the business because I dealt much more in, hey, how are you guys doing? How's your family doing? Much more than the hard financial part of it. But this family office definitely did all of that, all of the pieces of what a family office could be. But I really served the families in helping them think through not just their financial strategy, but their family strategy.
That's fun. Were there pieces of that experience that became part of the new thesis for what you would do when you decided you were going to take the next step and go back out to self-employment?
Yeah, there was a couple of things about why I left. That kind of answers your question. First thing is I had a daughter, so I'm a mom, and it's my favorite job. I know that's a lot of people say that, but it truly is my favorite job. And I had to travel a lot for work. And so there came to be this point where I was saying, well, I'm leaving my family to go help another family. This is not tracking. And so it was a lifestyle decision to go back into entrepreneurship, number one. But then quite frankly, number two, a lot of the families that we served, the way that they generated their wealth over long periods of time was through owning companies and building companies and potentially selling them. And so I said, well, I think that this might be a better move for me to build something of my own. And I have this experience. I think I can create something new and innovative in this space. And so that's what I'm setting out to do. So it's a much more ambitious goal than the first time, which was, hey, I hope to help some people on a personal basis. But now I'm really trying to build something that's a lot larger and that can impact a lot more people.
That's actually a great segue into where most businesses find themselves. I think most businesses don't understand what they're actually delivering. So the typical business that I have exposure to is a service business: lawyers, accountants, consultants, coaches, HVAC and plumbing, landscape maintenance. These are areas that I've been involved with from a private equity standpoint. They're businesses that get stuck because of a belief that they're delivering a service, and then they're on the service treadmill where they're constantly kind of trying to chase how do we deliver the service, and the professionals that come in and buy those and fix them stop the hamster wheel by productizing. So you come into the business and you say, what are we really delivering here, and how do we price that and then deliver that systematically? And it gives you a product instead of a service that becomes the thing that you can deliver. Without me stealing your thunder, you had a business where you were on the hamster wheel. You took a break, worked for this other company. Is there anything you're doing in the new business that I just spoke to?
Yeah. I mean, definitely productizing the service. I had kind of dabbled in that a little bit, but it was still me, the brand. And so a couple of things that I'm doing differently this time around. I had no recurring revenue. Big problem if you're trying to build something meaningful. And so you're not driving yourself crazy every month at the beginning of the month, right? First thing. Second thing is I didn't want to be the face. I knew that was going to be really hard down the road to sell a company that's me, the brand. You're seeing that happen with personal brands right now. They can't really get out of it. And you've created this awesome cash cow, but you really can't have any type of liquidation event. So that was the second thing that I have changed. And then the other piece of it was I really hadn't leveraged the first time around B2B partnerships. I really was focusing on B2C. And quite frankly, whenever you're looking to change jobs, 9-to-5ers don't have maybe the same appreciation or understanding about coaching and how that could really impact them in a way that maybe an entrepreneur would. And so I just felt like I was on that hamster wheel of trying to teach people what the value of it was, where if you go into the B2B side, it can be a little bit more scalable, impactful, and you can it's just better financially for the company.
Yeah. In fact, you just spoke to what most buyers want when they buy a business. So this is
Yep.
an interesting, I'll use it as an observation, maybe a teachable moment. When people say, what do I need to do in order to reframe the business that I own into something that I can sell? Business to business, recurring revenue, owner is not the face of the business so that it has portable management. So a business that can be sold without the owner. These are almost the pillars of
Yep.
a business that can sell to a professional buyer. So private equity group or strategic
Mm-hmm.
buyer. So you're doing from the outset the things that need to happen in order for you to have something that you can eventually
Yep.
sell. And a lot of people don't think of that in advance. And I wonder, like, was that part of your coming at this from a family office and saying, hey, they buy businesses. I want to be a business someday that can be bought.
My thought process was I want to be one of their clients one day. That was my big audacious hairy goal. They're gonna laugh if they hear that, but it was I was seeing a lot of these organizations or our families that had built these companies that have a lot of those attributes, and I was saying to myself, okay, I can see. Plus, I've done research, and I've done some analyzing, if you will, on what makes a company sellable. But I was seeing those companies be sold because of those attributes. So yeah, for me, it was a little bit of everything, a little bit of my own research, observation, and just having this school eventually maybe to be one of their clients. So putting it out into the universe, if you will.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really important observation for people, because if you're just starting out in a business, it's very easy to just start doing the service where you sell your service, you
Yes.
get a customer, and then you get another customer, and the cycle of business it is pretty simple. You
Mm-hmm.
get a lead, you close a lead, you deliver your service, right? So
Yeah.
this little three-part thing is almost a description of everybody's business. The more that you can systematize those things, the better. You can't systematize any of it until you take the delivery, the ultimate product, and make that a product where you say, this is how it gets packaged,
Mm-hmm.
here's how it gets priced, here's how I can measure my KPIs around that, product. And then you can easily build a sales system, which is lead conversion. And then you can generate your marketing, which is, generating some leads. And most people don't approach their business like building it that way from the beginning. They just start doing. And
Right.
and this is super common with lawyers. Lawyers go on their own
Yeah.
and they get some clients, and every month you need another client, and then you need another client.
Right.
So it's
Yeah.
a vicious cycle that's hard to break out of.
I think a lot of professional services really struggle with it. Whether you're a coach, consultant, lawyer, to your point, I feel like you're not really taught that, how to think about it differently. Like my college, I went to a good school, business school, and they didn't really teach me about any of this stuff. And so I had to really learn it on my own by trial and error, and then realizing, wow, I am literally creating a job for myself, a job, and I tried to get out of a job, and now it's time to create something that's actually going to have a meaningful impact on lots of people, but also on me personally, and that's okay to want both.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had people ask, what does scalability mean? And it means that you're not required in order to double or triple or quadruple the business, right? So
Yeah.
again, building that with you're not the face, there's a product, you
Yes.
know how it can get delivered, you can train around the delivery of that, then you can expand the business without more Jennas,
Yes.
or without more Jenna. You can hire more Jennas
Yes.
to expand the business, and
Yeah. Yeah,
so
it's
the
even made me think differently about some of my marketing, right? So I had a podcast before, but it was me. So I'm like, okay, do I need to maybe hire somebody else to do a podcast in the same genre? So it's not just relying on me. And what do I do to go find? So it's a different game now versus I did everything. So now I'm thinking about it bigger than I did before, which is a good thing and a bad thing.
Right. Yeah, yeah. There is some ease of just being the person that does everything, but
Yes.
building a business where you're thinking, how does everyone else do the thing, so that
Yes.
all I'm doing is architecting that, is the best way to become an owner, not an operator, and
Yes.
you're bridging both in the beginning, but
Yeah.
you're building it so that your escape velocity is a lot lower. You'll be able to get out of that gravity
Yeah.
pretty easily.
Yeah.
Um,
Did you experience that too whenever you were going back into corporate and then, coming back out of it? Was it hard for you to be in corporate? I'm curious.
being in corporate, an environment with a lot of smart people, I enjoyed. So I did my
Mhm.
best to really look around and say, like, I'm getting this experience a little bit. I'll tell you an economic story. When I was an undergrad, I had this attitude that B's or C's get degrees, and I just getting through. I was an entrepreneur, I had a business, and so getting my degrees was kind of like, it just needed to get it done. When I
Yeah.
went to law school, I looked at the cost, and it was $283.50 to sit through a class. So I
Yeah.
said, well, I'm paying a lot to sit here. I'm going to extract all of the experience I can out of this. And as a result, I was a good student. I didn't go in saying I'm going to get A's. I went in saying I'm paying a lot. I'd like to expect a lot. So my experience back in corporate was more of
Mm.
trying to, you sort of endure the restrictions and the corporate-ness. There's, pettiness sometimes. And, you're in an environment where people have not been entrepreneurs and don't understand somebody who acts like they don't need a job. But I didn't need a job.
Yeah.
The, but to be with really amazing talent and people that know their job and work hard, who you can
Mhm.
learn from, was worth the pain, I guess, as it were.
Mhm.
And I was this way, and when I got out of law school, I thought I could go on my own, I guess, but I didn't know how to practice law, so I went to work for a law firm. I mean, and
Yeah.
and at a law firm, I threw everything into it. I was trying to recruit clients, and on committees, and trying to do everything I could to grow that firm. But I was incredibly curious about, how do we run a firm? What is the
Yeah.
client cycle? What are we selling? How do we land clients? Sort of looking at the business of the business while I was there. And that one was a 4-year cycle, and it stretched me beyond
Yeah.
my desire to stay an employee. Um, but yeah, I totally encourage people who want to be entrepreneurs to go find a job if it's not there where you're at. I mean, certainly look around before
Mhm.
you quit a job you hate and say, what could I really do if I was here to just extract any skill or anything I could get out of this? And if it's not there, find one. And then, even when you go there, do everything you can to deliver value to that employer, but with a new mindset, be thinking, like, it only took me 4 years of working for a law firm to extract all that I needed for a 20-year career that
Mm.
made tons of money, and like, made me an expert in a field. It only took 2 years at an HVAC and plumbing roll up to gain the skills that I need to run a private equity fund that's rolling up, blue collar businesses right now. So
Mhm.
sometimes it's not the 10 years, but you'd better double down. You'd better work harder than everybody else. You'd better
Yeah.
really, like, get your head into that game if you're going to get treat it like currency. You're
Mhm.
filling your bank with this non-financial currency of relationships and skills and knowledge and
Mhm.
all of that.
Yeah.
And it's worth it to fill that safe, that vault up with value that you're going to extract for the rest of your career.
Yeah, I think it's kind of switching to that ownership mentality, which a lot of people don't necessarily do, but I know entrepreneurs, people who are naturally entrepreneurial minded are going to be owners of their career. They're going to be take initiative. And so that's like one of the number one things that I talk to job seekers about when they're transitioning jobs is you need to not look at yourself as just a cog in a wheel. You need to look above that cog in a wheel and actually understand how you contribute to the overall picture and then show that you can create value for an organization in that way and know that you're an asset to an organization, not just someone who gets paid. And so when you have that mindset shift, if you are a 9 to 5er, it is a total game changer in your job search process, in how you approach your career, how you approach promotions, how you think about how to get ahead. It's not just playing the game, it's like owning your own skills and capabilities, which I think is a really, really powerful thing that 9 to 5ers, even if they don't want to go into entrepreneurship, can steal from entrepreneurs.
Yes,
Yeah.
and to some extent, entrepreneur, not entrepreneur, some of that is risk aversion or lack thereof. So they say entrepreneurs are great at creating wealth; they're not great at keeping it.
Yeah.
Uh, we tend to be impulsive, take
Yes.
risks, that doesn't mean that you, like, for example, someone who's risk averse and therefore may never be an entrepreneur can can perform at a job
Hmm.
as well or better than me as an entrepreneur. There's nothing
Right.
special about being, naturally a risk taker.
Hmm.
Uh, because at a job you have you're not taking risk, right?
Yeah.
You have an employer. You don't have to have the stress that a lot of people are like, I don't know what to do when I don't have a paycheck coming in. Keep that
Yeah.
paycheck coming in, but borrow the rest of the kind of entrepreneur mindset about, like, I own these relationships, I own these skills,
Hmm.
I'm possessing these things for my benefit, even though I'm benefiting the organization that I work for.
I think the relationship piece is such a large portion of what makes somebody successful if they do stay into a 9 to 5. And I think a lot of times when people are going through maybe a job transition, they don't think about building those relationships until they need them. And that's the
Mhm.
wrong time to be building those relationships. Obviously, still do that, but you should really be nurturing relationships throughout your entire career. And that's the one thing I did a lot of things wrong in my career, but the one thing that I feel like has made me able to make so many pivots is the relationships that I have built and then kept year over year over year that helped me when I went into entrepreneurship, that helped me get out of entrepreneurship and now back into it. When I was thinking about making this change, it was a very large change for our family, for me personally. The idea of jumping back out on my own felt a little scary. Like, will I be able to do it again? Is this going to be too hard? A lot of those fears that come up. But I, tapped people from different seasons of my life to tell them what I was thinking about doing and to get their perspective. And that perspective was so valuable for me. And they've been cheering me on from the sidelines as I've been trying to build this thing. And so it's your relationships, I feel like, are the most critical part of a career well lived, because it's the people that really make it, but it's also the people that can help make you too.
Yeah, so let's talk about networking and relationship building,
Yeah.
because I think it's a thing that, whether you're looking to move up at work or move out, whether that's
Hmm.
out and lateral or out and entrepreneurial,
Yeah.
uh, you have this job that puts you in contact with people all throughout your industry. And I think the people who don't have the right mindset are only thinking about, who do I need to know and impress to maybe get a promotion? Who is important to me is a very small ecosystem.
Hmm.
But the reality is that they really could leverage the position they're in to have a much more expansive network. How did you do that in your career when you've had those jobs?
Yeah, I think probably a lot of what you did, you were very curious. I was just really curious about who I was working alongside. So whether they were junior to me, lateral to me, different department, super senior, I just talked to them like a regular person. I know that sounds really stupid, but a lot of people don't think to do that. So I was just really curious about my coworkers' lives, what was going on with them. I wanted to know how they got into what they got into. And so I just asked a lot of questions and acted like an advocate for them when maybe they tried to get into a different position or rise up or whatever that may look like. And so I think it was thinking about them first before me first, to your
Mm.
point, right? So a lot of people internally will think, oh, I just need to build a relationship with the CEO so he gives me XYZ role. Wrong way to look at it. I would find mentors at all different levels in your industry, outside of your industry, in your company, outside of your company. I mean, I had mentors, formal and informal mentors inside of my company, every company that I was at, and externally, whether it was me asking it or it was, gifted to me based off the company that I was a part of. Those were such great relationships because it helped me navigate whatever internal politics were actually going on, but it also allowed me to see what other people did in their careers that was exposing me to different ways of operating. So, I mean, relationships and just being super curious is like the best way to build your own skills, to get to know people internally. And ultimately, it's going to help you because people like people that are likable. And so it's not going to hurt you in the long run to be curious about people in different departments. So,
Absolutely. Curiosity and generosity are the
yes.
two features of great relationship building. It's true about friendship. We just naturally tend to be like, I'm
Yeah.
curious about what my friends are up to, and then I'm generous when they say, I need some advice, some help, or whatever.
Yeah.
And that carries over. And I can think of people I've seen in organizations where they're like, "Hey, do I need to know that guy? Is that important person?" And I'm like, the fact that you're asking that is telling me that you probably are, you you shouldn't know that person. You should just shut
Yeah.
up and do your job. You're never going to get ahead. The curiosity says, I'm not here to impress you. I'm here to learn from you. And people
Mhm.
love that because most people have progressed, have learned about things we don't even know we don't know. And
Yeah.
then the generosity is just not to say, I need to impress you and tell you what I do. No one knows. No one, they don't care. They want you to be generous and say, I learned this thing. It might help the company, might help you. Can,
Yes.
can, can we do something with what I've just learned? Can I be generous with you? And then in the organization, that's the way to begin to break down those strange false
Mhm.
barriers of hierarchy. But then think of the industry when you go out to a trade show, instead of walking around thinking that, why am I here? Who do I need to impress? Why am I sitting in this workshop? You're marching around with curiosity and
Yes.
generosity. So the moment someone needs something from you, wants to know, you're like, oh, I'm a connector. I'll get you, I know someone that can do that for you. Or you're curious and you're like, how do you get to do that?
Yeah.
That's cool. And people are always surprised when someone's curious because people are so busy talking, they're not listening.
Yeah. I think something else that you said that was interesting was around the hierarchy piece, where I think another thing that people can do when they're thinking about relationships is not to get intimidated by hierarchies. I
Mm,
think that also trips people up where they're like, "Oh, I can't talk to that person because he's the CEO," or whatever that may look like, and they kind of fall in line into these very rigid um formations, if you will, and don't feel like they can go outside of that. And so I think a benefit of me working at somewhere like the New York Stock Exchange early in my career is I was exposed to, I worked on Alibaba, which at the time was the biggest IPO in the history of the world. And
yeah.
so that kind of like level, you're just like, they're just people ultimately at the end of the day. But, you see them on the Wall Street Journal or you see them in these like really fancy big lights. And at the end of the day, they're just a person. Jack Ma is kind of short and like he's just a really nice guy. So um, I think it just normalizes the celebrity nature of how you perceive maybe certain leaders at your organization. And I think that actually really helped me later in my career. And even when I was working at, the family office where I was exposed to really impressive leaders that sold really large companies, some that you maybe have heard of. And I was able to build rapport in an easy way because I didn't treat them as if they were anything special. Not that they weren't special, but I wasn't treating them as if they were some holy grail that I couldn't touch. They're just a person at the end of the day. They got problems, they got issues, they got challenges, they got things that they're working on in ways that they're lonely. So I think that just humanizing leaders is also a great way to remind yourself that you can bring value to somebody even just by talk, even if you're so many rungs apart from each other.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. You've got, a lot of experience around helping people through their careers. We're talking a lot
Mhm.
about, I always end up defaulting toward like how to use a job to get out, but
Yeah.
you're counseling a lot of people over your career about choices, moving laterally. How do they take the career where they're at and pivot? For anyone who's listening right now, let's talk about your avatar of who you coach.
Yeah. So I think so specifically who my company coaches is really around that senior level person, mid to senior level person that's looking to make a strategic career change. So it's somebody who's maybe been in a manager or director level role and wants to go out because they're burnt out maybe at the place that they're at. They can't find a way opportunity to get promoted and they're really looking to be strategic and not just find any job but the right job. And so what a lot of people do is they go straight for their resume. They say, "Oh, I need to redo my resume. That's what I need to do first." And I usually tell people that is the wrong order. It's not that you shouldn't have a resume, it's just the wrong order in which to do things. And so if you're thinking about making a career change, you first got to figure out what you want. Do you actually want a new job? Sometimes people, when I was coaching people, we would uncover that they actually did want to go out on their own and they were never going to be happy in another in another job. And so it's you have to get clear on what you want first, because if you jump just to the deliverables, it's not really going to be helpful. You're going to be creating something, a marketing material for something that you're not even interested in doing. And so taking that time to get clarity first and then actually to start talking to people. So I would rather people network before they even get their resume done. One, because it'll force you to get your resume done when someone asks you to do it. And two, it's just a great way to uncover what do you actually want and what's out there for you and to get your name out there. And it's much more effective to land a new job that way than trying to go through the application systems. They're a bear these days, to say the least. And they're not impossible to get a job through, but I actually have never gotten a job through applying online. actually got rejected from the Muse from applying online. And I said, well, I need to work there. I'm going to figure out a way to get there. And so I had a friend of a friend of a friend know the CEO, and she put in my resume. And that's the only reason I got the job. And so it just shows that your network really is the most important piece to this whole entire puzzle.
Interesting. So, I mean, I'm around a cadre of peers. We're in our, the late 40s to early 50s.
Yeah.
That's probably close to the target. I know someone who, spent years in a particular mid-level management role, and then took a short sabbatical after one of the companies they worked for sold. So they got a little transaction bonus, took a year off, coming back to the market, just not really wanting the same old job, applying
Mhm.
for 200, 300 of the
Oh,
positions they're incredibly qualified for, and that they don't want that job, and then not having anyone hire them. It's let's solve that problem, because I know a bunch of those people. Did they need to stop thinking about resume and job applications entirely and just reapproach the professional sphere as I'm exploring my options. What's the strategy for that
yeah.
person who tends to be like 10 people in my life right now?
Yeah. So yes, if you're applying to 200 jobs and you're not getting, usually it's a couple of things. If you're applying to 200 jobs and you're not getting an interview, stop doing that. Because that's just not a good, that's like the definition of insanity, right? We don't want to keep going down that rabbit hole. If you are getting interviews and you're not landing it, it's usually a messaging problem. It
Mm,
usually has to do with, and it honestly is a messaging problem probably throughout the entire thing. If you don't know how to communicate your value in a very clear and concise way, similar to how an entrepreneur would have to pitch their business in a very short period of time, you have nothing. And so a company needs to understand how you're going to bring them value. And usually it's in one of three ways. You are going to either make a company money, save a company money, or make someone's life easier. I don't know
mm,
any job in the entire world that's within an organization, whether you're a janitor or the CEO, you're doing one or multiple of those things. And
yeah.
so if that just even gives you a framework to even start to think about, how do I bring value to a company? I think so many people think about their skills as things I've done and not ways I've added value. And so framing up that conversation to be more, this is what I'm really good at. This is how I know I can bring value. That's a better way to approach that conversation. And if you can make your digital materials reflect that, that's really important, but it's not the most important thing. So, yes, go back to networking, and please make sure your LinkedIn profile is up to date, because recruiters use LinkedIn as a search basis for talent like yourself. So if you do not have a solid LinkedIn presence, that's a problem. And if you're not posting on LinkedIn and you're looking to be seen as a thought leader or an expert in your field, which at that level I think is an important piece of it, that's also something you should be thinking about. Not everyone has to do it, but I do think that if you've had that many job applications and you haven't got anything back, try something different.
And then if you're helping somebody who's thinking, I'm not entirely loving what I've been doing, how do I
Mhm.
leverage whatever I've got to the
Yeah.
next step? I mean, do you reapproach the personal brand and what's on LinkedIn so that they don't look like a cookie cutter of what their maybe past resume
Yeah.
looks like?
Yeah. And that's why I think that leveraging your network is, especially if you're a career pivoter, you definitely shouldn't be applying online, because it's not going to go through any systems. And if you're trying to reframe that conversation, you definitely have to make it so that's a little bit more nuanced for that pivot. It's harder to do digitally and on your marketing assets if you're making a total pivot. So that's why having those conversations is going to be so important. And by having informational interviews with people, so reaching out to people and saying, hey, I love what your company does, I'm interested in pivoting into XYZ, would you be interested in hopping on a phone call, right? And having those conversations. I did a ton of those earlier in my career, and you'd be surprised at how many people agree to hop on those phone calls, right? We're all busy, but everyone likes to help somebody else out. And so I would definitely recommend trying to do that to even understand what it is you need to know to be successful in that interview, but also just to get to know people. You never know, it might be an in.
Yeah. 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 Well, and it's less threatening because it's not technically a job interview.
Right.
You're exploring what
Yep.
how might I, what advice can you give me? I'm curious what I don't know. I want to do X, Y, and Z that you
Yeah.
know more about. What
Mhm.
are the skills that I need? What are the and it might be you're asking the question because you think you have those skills, right? The
Yes.
to
Yes.
explore with someone in a non-threatening way. Mm.
100%. And I think that too, thinking through how you're going to approach that conversation from the beginning is so important, right? And so I think a lot of people get really nervous during those networking calls because they feel like they have to sell themselves, but really your job is just to be curious. That's your only job during those calls. And then your follow-up can be like, well, if you hear of any job opportunities, I'd love to be considered. How does your company go through the process of, is the best way to apply online? Is the best way to apply through you? Sometimes companies give referral bonuses, would love to help out if possible. So it's providing value while also at the same time selling yourself, but not really selling yourself.
I love it. A little bit more, just thinking through like while I have you and while people are listening who are thinking, what can we get out of Jena that's going to help us with our upward trajectory? What are some of the other keys that you would say if someone's like, you got 5 minutes of their time that from your experience that you need to pass on. You only have a little bit of time. They're not going to hire you, but you want to send them off with the best of what that you as the founder of Recruit the Employer can say. Mm-hmm. You should use me because I'm gonna our group's gonna get you there. Like mm-hmm. Not me. You use the company, right?
We're talking about the company, not me.
Not you. They can't. But you really, really want to help them and you got 5 minutes. What's the best advice you can give them?
You need to work on your confidence. 50% of the job application process and 50%, actually I'd say 70% of an interview is your confidence level. If you don't feel confident going into an interview, you are going to come across as not being confident. And even if you're incredibly qualified, it doesn't matter because you'll not convince anybody on the other side. So telling your story in an effective way will make you more confident. So you got to know your pitch really cleanly and very clear about how you bring value. And you got to be able to say it on command 24/7. That's the number one thing that you got to figure out because it's going to build your confidence, which in turn is going to make you be a better candidate long-term for that company that you want to work for, right? So who doesn't want a confident candidate? I think a lot of the reason why I personally was successful in each one of my career changes is I knew that I didn't know how to necessarily do all parts of the job, but I was confident in my capabilities. And that came across in all of the interviews I had. And they're like, well, this girl believes in herself, then we're going to have to believe in her too. And so every single job I've ever had I was hired for, I'd never had tons of formal experience. And so I just would say that's an encouragement to somebody that's listening on the other end that's feeling beaten down by the job search process. You can build your confidence back up. Know that your story is really valuable, but be able to tell it really well. If you do those things, you're going to be much more successful in the job search process.
Boom. I love it. Jena, that was fantastic. If someone wants to connect with you, obviously they can look up Jena, Jena Dunay on LinkedIn. Because you are /Jena Dunay. But is there a website we can send people to?
Recruittheemployer.com. Head there. You can sign up for our newsletter. We do a weekly newsletter that showcases 150K plus job openings. That means salary wise. So make sure that we focus on ones that are in your pay range, career advice. And then also we do some company deep dives to know what it's actually like to work for somebody before you actually work there. So
awesome. Well, thanks for the career advice and also for understanding your entrepreneurial journey and giving us some of the lessons that you've had along the way. Appreciate it. And everybody else, don't forget to send questions down to the hello@danarobinson.com that I can pop up in weekly office hours. And we'll see you on the next podcast. Thanks, Jena.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for joining me on this episode of the Exit Plan Podcast. I'd love to hear from you. Feel free to hit me up with questions or comments by emailing me at hello@danarobinson.com or leave comments and questions by calling 858-252-7785. Call 858-252-7785 and leave a message.